So here's the question. It's straight from the Apostle Paul. He was asked this question all the time in his ministry. So this question is always asked, just like it's asked today. So this is not a foreign question to anybody. Here it is. Verse 1, are we to continue? I'm going to give you the literal translation. Are we to continue in the sin that the grace may abound? So if we are saved by grace, if we're saved by grace salvation, if it's about a righteousness received, not a righteousness achieved, if it's about a grace salvation and not a work salvation, if it's about a Jesus salvation and not a self-salvation, if it is all about the grace, how do lives really change? How does your life change if it's all about grace? Now, the critic, if he asks this question, think of a critic. This is an opponent of Paul, opponent to the grace, the way the text says it, with a definite article. The grace salvation. Jesus and his salvation. A critic will come to this, the grace, and will say something like this. Well, if we're saved by grace, then why not sin your heart out? This is an opponent. This is a critic. Look, sin doesn't matter if it's all about grace. Let grace abound. Let sin and grace abound, because if it's all about grace, it doesn't matter how you live. It doesn't matter if you're good or you do good or be good. Who cares? It's all about grace. This is a critic. Or they say something like this: if we're saved by grace, then why be holy? There's no reason, there's no incentive to be holy. If it's by grace, why obey? I have no reason to obey if it's by grace. I have no reason to be holy if it's by grace. And do you see what's implied in the question of the critic? Do you see it? There's two incredible things implied in this critic's question. Grace alone, this is one, grace alone does not and cannot really change a life. That's what's implied. Grace can't change a life. Grace needs help. So to change a life, it's grace plus something we do. Grace plus something we activate. And if you look at the books and if you listen to the traditions, there are endless options for grace plus something. The something goes on forever. The something could be the law. The big law, the 10 Commandment law. Grace plus keep the law. Or grace plus be thin. Grace plus be capable. Grace plus be an achiever. Or it could be grace plus your devotion, sincerity, desiring God. Grace plus an act of your will, a commitment you make, a surrender, a yielding. Grace plus tapping into the Holy Spirit, and here's how you do it. Grace plus a biblical principle, a practical how-to. Grace plus just do it. Just do it. Grace plus a spiritual discipline. Grace plus, just do ministry. Here's a practical, effective ministry practice. I mean, the list is endless, right? And do you see what also is implied in the question of the critic? Grace is not a meaningful motivation for life change. So not only does grace need help, grace plus something, because grace cannot and will not, is not able to change the life, but grace is not a meaningful motivation to want to change. It's not a present power to enable you to change. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, so if grace is not the motivation in the Christian life, grace is not motivating us in the Christian life, if grace is not a meaningful motivation, what is? What would take grace's place if it's not the meaningful motivation in life change? You only have two options: fear and pride, which are the same thing. We could say fear on this side, self-confidence on this side. So what would fear motivation look like? It would look like this: obey or be disconnected in some way from God, His love, His acceptance, His blessings. Obey or experience suffering in your life. Obey or doom's coming. Obey or you'll become like those people. Obey or you won't measure up. Obey or you'll be that person you said you can't stand and could never be. How many people, I would never say this because I want to be like my dad, but how many people in life say, I will never, ever be like my dad? And that's the motivation, fear, the motivation for their whole life, for why they change, if they change. Because we're talking about biblical change, real change here. We're not talking about behavioral management change. Obey or others will think less of you. What will others think of you if you do this? What will others think of you if you don't do this? So it's not just what you think of yourself, but it's what other people think of us. Do you see fear? So if grace isn't a meaningful motivation, then what is? Fear is. And the other side, it's self-confidence. I'm so thankful I'm not like them. And I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher of you who spiritually struggle. I'm a teacher of you who are spiritually less than me. I'm a teacher because I know what's right. I know what's right theologically. I know what's right spiritually. I know what's right missionally. There's a lot of self-righteous ministry that goes on. I do it. Everybody does it, but we need to identify it. Self-confidence. Well, I'm on a mission from God because God told me this. God gave me this. I have the truth as opposed to the truth having me. I'm especially anointed. This is all self-confidence kind of approaches to life change. Okay, so that's the critic. The critic would look at that question. That's how the critic will ask that question. Grace can't possibly change a life. Grace can't possibly be a meaningful motivation in a life change scenario.